I was raised Irish pagan. We never told anyone of our beliefs. We were told to say we were Irish Catholic. The women in my family with spiritual abilities always have blue eyes, regardless of what makes sense genetically. For example, brown-eyed fathers and brothers. I was born on the 6th of the 6th, 96, or 666. My family were thrilled after 20 years of trying for a child. I was born, a miracle baby, only child. My parents divorced, and my mother remarried. I now have a huge Irish stepfamily and step-siblings. Ever since I was a child, I have had experiences. My ancestors and great-grandparents visiting in the night for late-night chats. My parents awoke many nights to me talking to someone. Sometimes I've heard strange voices reply. I also scared many babysitters. I was attacked by a demon at my father's when I was 8 years old in bed. I remember the fear and the overwhelming feeling of dread filling the house. I remember the smell of a wet dog and pressure. We had no pets at the time. I kept repeating, "You need to leave." Eventually the pressure disappeared, but the smell stayed for hours. When my step-grandfather was sick in the hospital, he had memory problems. He kicked out the whole family except me, as I reminded him of his dead sister. He would only talk to me, calling me her name. He didn't even remember his wife of 50 years or children. The day before he passed, I had a shadow man visit. This tradition of me having dreams or being visited before a family member, step or blood-related dies, has continued with the most recent being a month ago. My great step-aunt, of whom I never met, died suddenly. I had a dream about someone visiting me, and I knew I had to visit my step-grandmother. After I had visited her and left, she immediately received a call to say her sister had died. I am currently very stressed. As luck would have it, my step-grandmother has another sick sibling. My step-grandmother is one of 9. When her sister passes, she will be the last one left. My step-grandmother is turning 90 in a month. As you can probably tell, the cycle of bad dreams and visits has been consistent and unwanted. My mother's side of the family say I should be grateful for the prophetic dreams and my gifts. Due to these dreams, I have warned multiple people in my life of impending danger. For example, car crashes. Usually after a dream, whatever I dream of will happen within 2 days. I've helped people I love. I also don't enjoy the fright or nightmares. I will also share with you something personal that happened to me when I ignored my intuition. I was in a situation where I was horribly burned. I now have permanent scarring to 30% of my body. If I listened to my intuition and stayed where I was, I wouldn't have had the physical, mental, and emotional scars I now have. My cousin, however, has a different. She is more of a witch, and she does Reiki professionally. She cast a spell on her husband's ex-wife to receive full custody. Within 2 weeks, the ex-wife was institutionalized, and my cousin was granted full custody. Because of this, I worry about the power my family have and the expectations on me. Another example is over 40 years ago. My uncle died. He was only 21. All the women in my family felt his death and experienced it. It was a pretty gruesome death, and I wouldn't wish that what they went through on anyone. That's another reason why I'm scared for my future, as those close to me die in gruesome ways I do not want to experience. As I predicted close friends' boyfriends passing, it was completely unexpected, and I was not believed at the time. Obviously, I have a lot of guilt from this. The death could have been prevented, but it was also in my hands. I also know that someone close to me is going to die in a car crash at age 35. I don't know who, and I don't know when. I'm not sure whether I will be 35 when this happens, or whether it's someone who is turning 35 in my life. So there's no way to plan for this, and essentially, no way to stop the future. couple of weeks ago, I wrote about seeing an old man on the garage roof of my childhood family home in Manchester. After that rather harrowing encounter, I never saw him again. I never dreamt about him again, or even really thought about him. I did have another experience in the same house a couple of years later, which frightened me even more. This one stayed with me from the night it happened as a 9-year-old all the way into adult. I still think about it regularly, not just because it genuinely shook me to my core, also because I wasn't the only one to experience it in the house. As a child, I was very adventurous in my outlook towards fear and thrill-seeking. I'd watch every horror film I could get my hands on. I'd read the scariest novels in my parents' library. I'd throw myself willingly at anything that might have a chance of scaring me. Nothing ever really came close. Once I got into the upper ages of primary school, I started going out with my friends more and staying out later. My parents were very relaxed with my curfew. They knew me well enough to know I'd never put myself in danger or get into trouble, so I was generally allowed to stay out a lot later than the other kids in my group, who had to be home for around 7 p.m. The park we used to hang around at was further from my house than anyone else's, so I always ended up walking alone home. One night, I impulsively decided to take a different, longer route home that led me past a cemetery. It was the same cemetery that a few of my relatives were buried in, so I was pretty comfortable being there. I stopped to look at the black gates guarding the entrance. They were huge, easily 3 times my height, and were in pretty poor condition. It must have been years since they were painted or had the rust scraped off them. The gates were covered in moss, and the spikes mounting them had pierced an assortment of different colored leaves, and spider webs covered the tips of them, with threads connecting each spike. I wanted to go in, but I don't know why something felt as though it was pulling me in. The gates were barred shut in the evening, so my only way in was to climb. I eventually tugged myself into doing it. I was more worried about someone seeing me do it than any danger that might befall me while attempting to get over them. I was a fairly athletic kid, so getting over there was no issue, and I was certain I hadn't been seen, even though my weights made the gates rattle loudly and violently. Once I was inside the cemetery, I just walked around, reading the names and ages of the people buried there, taking in when they were born and when they died. Like most cemeteries, the newer plots are at the front, so I started heading deeper to find older graves. I must have been walking for about 20 minutes when I saw a very unique looking headstone. It was about 10 foot tall and was shaped like an angel holding a baby, with a young child standing beside her. The faces that had been carved into stone had been weathered away, leaving them featureless. They were eerie to look at in those surroundings, and with the sun having long since set. There was no noise, except for the rustling of the trees and the occasional sound of a car driving past the entrance. I knelt at the grave and tried to make out the name. There was 3, and they'd been dead for a long time. The name at the top of the list, I refused to typo, was clearly the mother, given her age. The other 2 were younger, children. The elder of the 2 had died at the age of 8, while the youngest had only lived for a year. The dates of their deaths were the same. All 3 had passed away at the same time. As a 9-year-old, I understood how odd that was, but not that it could have and likely meant they died in a tragic accident or in a murder-suicide. While I was observing the gravestone, I heard a branch snap in the distance behind me. I immediately jolted around and began scanning to see what had caused her. It was tough to say, but I couldn't make anything out. While my back was turned on the grave, the hairs on my neck tingled, like someone had blown on them. It was enough to tell me I shouldn't be there, and I needed to leave. I ran towards the exit and scaled the gate without worrying how much noise I was making. Once I was over the gates, I began making my way home. Occasionally, I glanced back into the cemetery through the cast iron bars. I was being followed. I was sure of it. The graveyard was pitch black, but I could still make out the silhouette of a person walking alongside me, but much deeper in. I quickened my pace, but the shade kept up, and it now looked closer than before, like it was walking closer toward me, but also still moving sideways. I ran across the road without looking. A car had to slam its brakes to avoid hitting me. The driver beeped her horn and glowered at me. I paid her need attention. I was only thinking about getting home as quickly as possible. I ran the rest of the way. By the time I got home, it was pretty late. My mom told me to get washed up and go straight to bed. I did as I was told. I wanted to put my time in the graveyard behind me and move on to a new day. While I was asleep, I kept dreaming about the cemetery. The silhouette had moved along beside me. Then I dreamt about the silhouette walking through the streets of my neighborhood and heading straight for my house. In the dream, the silhouette headed straight into my house, up the stairs, and to my room. I woke from the dream and stared at my ceiling. I could see a small amount of light coming through my door. It was ajar. They never slept with my door open, and once shut, it was impossible for the doors to open without turning the handle. My room is deathly silent as usual. I could hear someone walking around in the infinite darkness that was the floor space in my room when the curtains were shut. I peeked through the gap in the railing of my bed. You could see the silhouette standing by my wardrobe, thanks to the light coming through the small opening of my door. I shut my eyes and tried to regain my composure. I could hear it moving around. The noise stopped, and the usual silence of my room at night returned briefly. It was broken by the sound of my bunk bed steps groaning under the weight of someone climbing them. I heard the first step, then the second, and then the third. I opened my eyes to look and saw the shape looking back in my direction from the top of the steps. For a split second, I was transfixed. It wasn't a silhouette anymore. It was a woman, wearing a black dress with a veil covering her face. Her face had no features, just like the headstone I'd stopped to look at in the cemetery. Even without eyes, I could tell she was looking at me. I threw the covers over my head and hoped that would be enough to hide from her. It wasn't. I felt her weight shift from the steps onto the bed itself. I felt her edging closer to me. I could feel the weight of her on top of me. It was suffocating, crushing. She moved in the most unnatural way possible, more like a snake than a human. She was shifting up the bed and closer to my face until she stopped. I knew her face and mine were now level. I shut my eyes again and told myself no matter what happened, I would not open them again. My covers were pulled away and I could feel her breath on me. It was odorless and cold, like the breeze that squeezes under a closed door. After what felt like an eternity had passed, I couldn't keep my eyes closed anymore. I opened them and looked at her. She wasn't featureless now. I could see her. I could see her old, freckled skin, her pointed nose and thin lips. Her eyes were closed, so tightly they looked sealed shut. Only a second had passed before I let out the biggest scream I had ever managed in my life. I wanted to wake up every person on my streets if possible. The woman slithered away without making a sound, without opening her eyes. I heard my parents' door open and the steps of my bed creaking. My mom and dad burst through my door and flicked my light on. As my eyes struggled to adjust, I could only make out the silhouettes of my parents and the woman. She walked right past them without them noticing. They spent the rest of the night reassuring me that it wasn't real. My dad took me back to my room after I'd started to calm down. I stepped in and saw a muddied footprint on my carpet. I pointed it out to my dad. He could see it too. I could see on his face he was uneasy about it. He suggested I stay in my room. Eventually, I managed to fall back to sleep. The next day, My parents agreed to swap our rooms. I never experienced anything paranormal in that house again. We moved about 2 years later. I know my dad will have convinced my mom to swap rooms. I didn't find out why until 3 years ago, when my dad passed away from cancer. On the evening of his funeral, me and my family stayed up talking about our lives together. My mom mentioned what happened that night, and I told everyone who didn't already know the story. When I finished it, my younger sister, who wasn't alive at the time this happened, and my mom shared a look. I asked them what it was for, and my mom told me that my dad had seen something almost identical to my experience. The same woman, the same feeling of her crawling towards him on the bed and just staring at him. He didn't tell me, because he didn't want to frighten me more about the whole thing, and once we'd moved and time had gone by, it was no longer something to even talk about. According to my mom, he'd seen the woman wandering in the house many times after I. My mom believes in the paranormal, but has never experienced anything herself. But she always said me and my dad were very receptive to things like the woman has haunted my dreams so many times over the years, and even now, despite the fact I live 100 miles from that home, there are times where I feel like she is watching me still. There are times where I can see a silhouette on the other side of the road. Only when I turn my head, there's nothing or no one there. To this day, I'm convinced that woman haunted my dad and is still doing the same to me. I work for a home security company, doing over-the-phone tech support. If a customer's system is offline or a sensor suddenly stops working, I'm the person they call. The most frustrating piece of equipment we have are the cameras. They don't want to connect, picky with the internet they connect to, just an overall technical nightmare. But once they're online and connected, they're good. Now, why anyone will want a camera in their home watching their every move is beyond me. But I got a call from a God-fearing woman who was having a panic attack. One of her indoor cameras was facing her bedroom window. She came in for bed the night before, calling, and saw a face right in the window staring at the indoor camera. And it didn't film him. The camera just conveniently shuts off. These cameras don't shut off. They are plugged into your wall so that they don't shut off. I was about to write this off as another crazy customer, but she had me watch another strange video. Her outdoor camera was stolen and it filmed air, that's it. To unscrew the camera, you need to be facing it. There was no way to take it down without giving the camera a good look at your face. It was nothing. The police thought this woman was crazy while deleting the footage. No, she couldn't. I spent an hour walking her through logging into an app. She was not capable of deleting videos. The call ending with me unable to find a reasonable explanation as to why this was happening and her praying. The second call that was weird was from a young woman. She had gotten a notification from her app saying that her indoor camera detected a human. This is its default notification when it detects any movement, a curtain, cat, a fly flying too close to the camera. Your camera has detected an intruder. Honestly, what drama queens these cameras? I have her check the live feed, and nothing. I ask her to look for small things, like a blanket moving due to AC, shadow from a passing car. Nothing. Finally, I check the camera myself, and there was genuinely nothing. It's just a 6-second video of her entryway. The sun shining through the windows by a front door, a cute little rug with a couple pairs of spare shoes. No dust, no curtains, no bugs or shadows. Just an empty room. I called my supervisor over to double check that I wasn't missing. No, there was no reason for the camera to do that. My supervisor whispered ghost, and I had to inform the customer if she was scared, she should call the authorities to search her home. I'm open to any reasonable explanation for this, but honestly my co-workers and I are thinking that their homes are actually haunted. But still, as driving us up a wall, searching for explanation. I, 25 male, and my fiancée, 25 female, decided to spend the night at a haunted hotel in our stay for our 1-year anniversary when we were 20 years old. I've always been a firm believer in the paranormal, but my fiancée was a major skeptic. That is, until we spent a night at this hotel. When we arrived, it was a normal, really old kind of country-style B&B, and there was only one other couple there. There were many experiences we had this night, but this was definitely the weirdest, most undeniable experience I had. During our ghost hunt, it was about 11 p.m., and it was us and a couple of investigators going into a room that was haunted by a 15-year-old girl and her cat. At this point in the tour, I was the only male there. When we walked into the room, I felt as if my body had been covered in ice. I was so cold and couldn't move or speak. I stood in the center of the room for a few minutes and seemed almost like no one else noticed what was happening. After a while, I was able to speak, and I asked the rest if they felt the cold. They responded by telling me, no, the room actually felt to be the warmest in the house. I was pretty freaked out at this point and was ready to leave the room. Upon leaving, I was the last to leave the room and made sure to close the door behind me. As I turned down the next hallway, I started hearing a bell, like from a cat's collar. I turned around and saw a small black cat walking down the hallway towards the room. I don't know what got into me, but I wanted to follow this cat. I made my way back down the hall, following the cat, but when I turned down the hallway to the other room, the cat was gone. Not only was the cat gone, but the door I had closed was wide open. I walked back into the room and the cold sensation swarmed my body again. But this time, I could hear the cat's bell and a little girl absolutely sobbing, like uncontrollably sobbing. I was terrified. I've never moved so fast before in my life. I sprinted out of the room, back to the group. I told them about the cat, but couldn't work up the courage to tell them about the little girl crying. Still, to this day, I never told my fiancée about it. This was my last encounter of the night. The boy didn't leave a mark on me. My interest in the paranormal has only spiked since then. Just as a bit of background info, I'm a technology industry professional, currently working on teaching vehicles how to drive themselves. In order for this technology to work, it uses a mix of radar and LiDAR to read the world around it, build a 3D representation of what it sees, and then categorize it before mapping it out in real time. Essentially, it constructs the world around it constantly to learn, adapt, and self-navigates from point A to point B and beyond. As part of this process, we often send out mapping vehicles to pre-map the area and/or determine if the area is a viable location for such a vehicle to operate in. A process we typically do at night because there was way less traffic on the road, and we have ample time to correct any issues that may occur. Last year, one of our mapping vehicles was out and about. They happened to enter into a cemetery one evening. We don't map cemeteries, but we will sometimes map the entrance or driveways of some locations in order to provide the vehicle additional options should it run into something we'd rather avoid, for example road construction, police activity, or an accident. In any case, the vehicle wound up going into the cemetery. A few moments later, the technician watching the vehicle is picking up goes, "Hey man, you seeing this?" As I stated, the vehicle was scanned and categorized what it picks up in its area of operation. I look at the screen, and although the vehicle was picking up and categorizing pedestrians in the area, there was no one there to see. Even the categorization was fluctuating from pedestrian to unknown, even to animal. We'd see them pop up on the LiDAR the vehicle was using to scan the area, and the trajectory they were headed in at the time. Look up at the real-time cameras, and nothing. Both of us are natural skeptics, but both of us have also had our experiences with things we couldn't explain, so it's a healthy skepticism. We kept looking for ways to debunk what it was that we were seeing, but there was no explanation we could think of. The vehicle was clearly picking up something on its LiDAR that we just could not see in the cameras. This went on for several minutes, and long enough that we called others over to verify what we were seeing. Whatever the vehicle was picking up that night was something that we just couldn't see with the naked eye. For context, we're female. When this happened back in mid-February 2020, my friends and I were all 50. This takes place in Italy, on a school trip we went on. The trip itself was alright, but being the dumb teenagers we are, we decided to push the boundaries. Our school had booked us into a pretty average hotel, low budget. So one night, two of my friends asked me if I wanted to sneak out with them during the night and go to a nearby beach. I'm generally quite sensible, but they kept persuading me until I finally gave in. We would only get one opportunity to do this, right? So, we waited till at 1 a.m., messaging each other when to leave our rooms and meet in the corridor. It was only 3 of us. We didn't want anyone else to know, as they might snitch on us. The teachers were sleeping in rooms opposite ours, so we had to be so quiet as not to get caught. I can remember still how worried I was we would get caught and they would ring my parents. But we were successful and stuck our way down to the lobby. For whatever reason, no one was at the front desk, so we hurried through the lobby and out the front door, not waiting around to get caught. None of us actually knew Italian. This is possibly one of the dullest things we could. We walked for about 2 miles down a beach. All smoke we had actually managed to pull off our perfectly devised. The streets were completely empty, not surprising considering it was 1 a.m. But it didn't stop that anxious feeling in the back of my mind. I knew what we were doing would get us in so much trouble if we were caught. We had to walk down hundreds of steps in order to actually get through. Plenty of time to reconsider our action. But we were stupid and kept going. Something I regret now. The beach was really quite busy. It was a full moon that night, and the beach was lit up in a beautiful soft light. We had the whole place to ourselves. We pissed around for 10 minutes or so, and then my friends said they wanted to go in the sea. I was adamant I wasn't going in, despite their protest. So they told me to keep an eye on their stuff. We'd only brought a few jackets and our phones. They rolled up their trousers and went knee-deep into the sea. I started filming them and taking pictures. The others would be so jealous, I remember thinking. Just wait till they see the photos. They spent about 5 minutes splashing around in the cold sea before they came back onto the beach and started stripping off more. I couldn't believe it. They were going to go swimming. They had the genius idea to go in underwear. I couldn't stop laughing at this point. Looking back at it now, I should have persuaded them not to. I didn't understand the gravity of the situation we would soon be in. They both ran towards the waves and jumped in at the same time, screaming and giggling in the freezing water. I stood on the shore laughing and filming them. Whilst guarding their things, I got this eerie feeling of being watched. I can only put it down to instinct. Naturally, I put my guard up and I looked around. I'm so glad I did, because God knows what would have happened if I didn't notice. 2 men were sitting, maybe 30 meters from us, in the dark. I can't be sure as I only noticed them for a second before turning back around. But it looked like one of the men was holding his phone up, filming us. My stomach dropped. I called those my phone. They must have noticed the tone in my voice was completely shaken, despite my best efforts to be discreet. They walked up the sun towards me, dripping wet and freezing cold. I told them 2 men were sitting behind us, watching us. I'd never seen them so scared. That's when the trepidation hit us. No one knew we were here. As far as anyone else was concerned, we were fast asleep in our hotel rooms. These men could easily take us down. Kidnap us, rape, murder. No one would ever know. I whispered to my friends that we needed to leave, right now. I told them not to bother getting dressed, just to grab their stuff and leave as inconspicuously as possible. They agreed with no hesitation. At this point, I was really worried. The men must have known that we saw them, despite our best efforts. Nothing could conceal the raw fear we felt, and probably looked so soon. As we approached the steps, I made a quick glance behind us. A sweat broke out to my forehead. The men were now slowly walking towards us. Fight or flight kicked in, and I shouted at my friends to run. Barefoot and soaked, they scrambled up the steps as quickly as they could. We kept pushing. I didn't look behind me for fear of how close they could. We didn't stop once we reached the top of the steps and onto the pavement. We were running on pure adrenaline at this point. Our legs burned. I looked down to see both my friends' feet were bloody, but they didn't stop. We didn't stop running until the hotel was in sight. I turned around again, and to my relief, I couldn't see the men. We walked through the entrance to the hotel. This time, however, there was a man at the front desk. He started talking in Italian. We didn't understand him, so we kept walking, my friends leaving bloody footprints to the lobby. Once we reached the corridor, we made a mutual vow to never to tell anyone about that night, and we all went back to our rooms. The man at the front desk must have told our teachers that he saw us at 3 a.m. walking through his hotel lobby, leaving bloody footprints everywhere. Because that morning I awoke to a loud banging on our door. For the sake of the story, I'll call her Miss Smith. Miss Smith was shouting at everyone, asking who it was that left last night. Of course, everyone was confused, and I didn't dare speak up. Neither did my friends. After several speeches made about the severity of our actions and how they were going to find out who it was, I was terrified. My 2 friends finally spoke up and admitted it was them. Thankfully, they left my name out of it, which I'll forever be grateful for. The teachers were furious, as you can imagine. They received phone calls home, and they had to delete all pictures taken that night. I always think back to how that night could have ended, how horribly wrong it could have gone, and despite it being one of the dumbest things I've ever done, I'm glad I decided to go, because it terrifies me to think what would have happened to my 2 friends if I wasn't there to spot those men.